It was a Wednesday, the kind that starts with burnt toast and ends with questions you never saw coming. I was halfway through replacing rotted deck boards at some insurance adjuster's lake house when my phone rang. Buzzing against the hammer, in my back pocket, like an angry wasp. "This is Edwin," I said, wiping sawdust off my hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "Hi, is this Edwin Reeves? The handyman?" The voice was smooth, confident, but with just enough hesitation to make me pay attention. Like someone who knew exactly what they wanted but wasn't sure they should be asking for it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Depends what needs fixing," I replied, squinting at the deck board that was fighting me like it had personal grievances. "And whether you're calling because your cousin's neighbor's brother-in-law said I'm cheap," she laughed, not a polite chuckle, but something real and unexpected. "No, I'm calling because Mrs. Patterson down the street said you actually show up when you say you will. Apparently that's rare in this business. Mrs. Patterson talks too much, but she's not wrong. What's the problem?" My mailbox is having an existential crisis. It's leaning so far to the left, I'm surprised the mail carrier hasn't filed a workers' comp claim. I found myself grinning despite the splinter currently embedded in my thumb. Existential crisis, huh? Those are usually above my pay grade, but I can handle the leaning part. I was hoping you'd say that. You free this afternoon? I know it's short notice, but lady, in this business, short notice is the only kind of notice. "What's your address?" She gave me directions to Maple Ridge Drive, one of those neighborhoods where the houses cost more than my truck but somehow always needed the same basic repairs as everywhere else. Gravity doesn't discriminate based on property values. I've learned neither do leaky pipes or loose deck boards or, apparently, existentially troubled mailboxes. "I'll be there around 3, I told her. "Name's Edwin, by the way. Edwin Reeves." "Clara," she said. "Clara Morgan and Edwin. Thank you for not asking why I didn't just call my husband to fix it." The line went quiet for a beat too long. "I wasn't going to ask," I said finally. "Good, because the answer's complicated, and we just met." After she hung up, I stood there on that half-finished deck, holding my phone and wondering what exactly I'd just agreed to. In 15 years of fixing other people's problems, I'd learned to read between the lines of service calls. The widow who needed her gutters cleaned but really needed someone to talk to for an hour. The divorced dad who called about a sticky door but spent the whole visit asking if I thought his ex-wife was being unreasonable about visitation. The empty nesters who hired me to reorganize their garage but really wanted help figuring out what to do with rooms that suddenly felt too big. Clara Morgan's laugh suggested she wasn't lonely. Her voice suggested she wasn't helpless. But that pause, that moment of silence when she mentioned her husband, that suggested something else entirely. I finished the deck boards, packed my tools, and drove toward Maple Ridge thinking about voices and the stories they tell when people think you're not listening. Clara's house turned out to be a 2-story colonial with navy blue shutters and a front garden that looked like someone actually cared about it. Not manicured like a magazine cover, but lived in, cared for. The kind of garden where someone spent Saturday mornings with their coffee and a hand weeder, pulling up dandelions and talking to the roses. The mailbox, however, was having the existential crisis she'd described.
8.
It leaned so far toward the street, I was genuinely impressed it was still standing. The post had clearly given up somewhere around last winter's freeze-thaw cycle. Now the whole thing looked like it was perpetually bowing to passing traffic. I was studying the situation, mentally cataloging what I'd need from my truck when the front door opened. "That bad, huh?" Clara Morgan called from the porch steps. I turned around and immediately understood why Mrs. Patterson had specifically mentioned that I show up when I say I will. Clara Morgan was the kind of woman who probably had men making promises they couldn't keep on a regular basis. She was maybe 50, maybe a little less, with shoulder-length hair the color of autumn leaves and laugh lines that suggested she used them frequently. She wore jeans that had been broken in through actual wear rather than expensive distressing, and a green sweater that brought out her eyes. No wedding ring, I noticed, but a pale band of skin where one used to be. "It's not terminal," I said. nodding toward the mailbox. But it's definitely having some structural integrity issues. Structural integrity, she repeated, walking down the steps toward me. I like that. Makes it sound more dignified than falling over. Everything sounds more dignified with the right words. I prefer architectural challenges to whoever installed this was probably drunk. She laughed again, that same genuine sound from the phone. And is that your professional diagnosis in this case? I crouched down to examine the post more closely. The concrete footer had cracked, probably during a hard freeze. The whole thing had been slowly surrendering to gravity ever since. Actually, this one's just age and weather. Sometimes things give up not because they were installed wrong, but because they've been holding strong for so long they're just tired. When I looked up, Clara was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. How long do you think it was holding strong? She asked quietly. Hard to say without digging it up, but based on the concrete type and the way it's weathered, maybe 20, 25 years. She nodded slowly. That sounds about right. Something in her tone made me think we weren't just talking about the mailbox anymore. Well, I said, standing up and brushing dirt off my knees, the good news is it's definitely fixable. I'll need to dig out the old footer, reset the post with fresh concrete. Should take a couple hours, maybe 3 if I run into any surprises underground. No surprises, Clara said. I've had enough of those lately. I was about to ask what she meant when she smiled, bright and deliberate, like someone consciously changing the subject. Can I get you something to drink while you work? Coffee? Water? Something stronger? It's after 5 somewhere, and you're about to dig a hole in my front yard? Coffee would be great, I said. Black. If you have it, I have it. And Edwin? She was already heading back toward the house. Thanks for coming so quickly. And for not asking complicated questions. Yet, I called after her. She paused at the front door and turned back. Yet. I said I wasn't asking complicated questions yet, but lady, it's only been 10 minutes. Give me time. The smile she gave me was different this time. Not bright and deliberate, but something smaller and more real. Well then, she said, disappearing through the front door. This should be interesting. As I walked back to my truck to get my tools, I found myself wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. And why, for the first time in months. I was actually looking forward to finding out. The coffee Clara brought me was good. Not the bitter truck stop brew I was used to, but something that tasted like she'd actually thought about it. She handed me the mug along with a plate of what looked like homemade cookies, still warm. Oatmeal chocolate chip, she said, settling onto the porch steps to watch me work. I stress bake. Fair warning, if you keep coming around, you're going to gain weight. I took a bite. They were perfect crispy edges, chewy centers, the kind of cookies that made you understand why people got married in the first place. What are you stressed about? Currently. Whether my mailbox repair guy is going to think I'm weird for stress baking at 3 in the afternoon? Lady, I once had a client offer me a martini at 9 in the morning because she was nervous about me seeing her basement. Trust me, warm cookies don't even register on the weird scale. She laughed, but it was quieter this time, more thoughtful. Did you take the martini? Hell no, but I appreciated the gesture. I started digging around the mailbox post, working, carefully to avoid damaging whatever landscaping she had going on nearby. The concrete was more deteriorated than I'd initially thought, not just cracked, but actually crumbling in places. This thing had been held up by sheer stubbornness and wishful thinking for longer than was probably safe, Clara said after. A few minutes of comfortable silence, Mrs. Patterson said, You've been doing this for 15 years. 16 next month. Started right after my divorce. Turns out when your ex-wife takes half your stuff, you get pretty motivated to learn how. To fix things yourself? The practical approach to heartbreak. Cheaper than therapy. More useful than drinking. I paused in my digging to look at her. What about you? How long have you been stress baking? She was quiet for so long I thought maybe she hadn't heard. Me? Then? Officially? About 6 months? Unofficially. Probably my whole adult life. Just used to have better reasons to hide it. The way she said it made me think there was a story there, but I didn't push. In my experience, People told you what they needed you to know when they were ready. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Usually right around the time you stopped asking, I'd gotten about halfway through digging out the old concrete, and Clara suddenly stood up. I should probably tell you something, she said, about why I called you instead of handling this myself or waiting for someone else to do it. I stopped digging and looked up at her. She was wrapping her arms around herself despite the sweater, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked uncertain. My husband died 7 months ago, she said quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Heart attack. Completely unexpected. He was 52 and ran marathons and ate more vegetables than any human being should have to endure. And then one Tuesday morning, he was just gone. I'm sorry, I said, because that's what you say, even though the words never feel like enough. Thank you. The thing is, Tom, my husband, Tom, was the one who fixed things, everything, mailboxes, leaky faucets, squeaky hinges, whatever. He actually enjoyed it. Said it was relaxing. Well, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. I used to joke that I'd married my own personal handyman service. I could see where this was going, but I let her tell it. So when the mailbox started, my first instinct was to wait for him to notice it and fix it. It took me 3 weeks to remember that wasn't going to happen anymore. She sat back down on the steps, harder this time. 3 weeks of walking past that stupid mailbox every day, getting more and more frustrated with it, before it occurred to me that I could just call someone. That's not stupid, I said. Grief makes everything weird, even the simple stuff. Does it get easier? The figuring out how to do things differently part? I thought about that while I went back to digging. The concrete was stubborn, and the work gave me time to consider my answer. I don't know about easier, I said finally. It gets more automatic. Eventually you stop thinking about what your ex would have done, or what your husband would have done, and you start thinking about what you're going to do. Takes a while though. How long? For me, about 2 years before I stopped setting 2 plates out for dinner, another year before. I stopped buying the expensive peanut butter she liked, even though I hate it. I glanced up at her, but everyone's different. And divorce isn't the same as what you're dealing with. No, she agreed. But the having to figure out how to be just yourself again part? That's probably similar. We worked in comfortable quiet. For a while after that, me digging, her alternating between watching me and staring off at something I couldn't see. The concrete finally came loose in chunks, and I started working on clearing out the hole for the new footer. That's when Clara said it. Edwin? Her voice was softer now, almost tentative. You're 50. Will you kiss me? I froze, shovel halfway to the ground. The question hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore, and equally impossible to interpret. Then, before I could respond, she laughed bright and sharp and obviously mortified. Just kidding. God, I'm sorry. But that just came out. I don't know why I said that. I think I've been living alone too long. Starting to say whatever random thoughts pop into my head. She was talking faster now, words tumbling over each other. Please pretend I didn't just proposition my mailbox repair guy. This is exactly the kind of thing Tom used to warn me about, how I don't have an internal filter when I'm nervous. But the thing was, she hadn't been nervous when she said it. She'd been thoughtful, deliberate. It was only after when she realized what she'd done that the nerves kicked in. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt off my hands, and looked at her. Clara Morgan, with her autumn hair and her stress baking and her mailbox that had been leaning for 3 weeks, she'd forgotten she was allowed to fix things herself now. For what it's worth, I said carefully, I don't think you were entirely kidding. Her cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look away. No, she said quietly. I probably wasn't. And for what it's worth, I continued, the answer would have been yes. We stared at each other for a long moment, both of us apparently surprised by the turn this conversation had taken. Then Clara's face split into a grin, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from her. Well, she said, this is definitely going to make the rest of the mailbox repair interesting. I picked up my shovel and got back to work, mostly to give us both a chance to process whatever had just happened. But I was smiling too, and I was pretty sure she could tell. Just so we're clear, I said without looking up, I always finish. The job I was hired to do first. Good to know, Claire replied. I appreciate a man with professional standards. Just like that, everything between us had shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but definitely. It's like a mailbox that had been. Leaning for so long, you'd stopped noticing, until suddenly someone pointed out it didn't have to stay that way. The new concrete needed 24 hours to cure properly, which meant I had a perfectly legitimate reason to come back the next day. Clara seemed pleased about this, though she tried to hide it behind practical concerns about whether the mailbox would fall over completely if someone looked at it wrong. It's fine, I assured her, packing up my tools. Gravity's been working on this problem for months. It can wait one more day, and you're sure it won't just topple into the street? Clara, that mailbox has survived 3 seasons of you walking. Past it, muttering under your breath. I think it can handle one more night. She laughed, and I realized I was already addicted to that sound. I do not mutter under my breath. Right, you have animated conversations with inanimate objects, much more sophisticated. Exactly. I'm practically a philosopher. I was loading the last of my tools when a silver sedan pulled into the driveway behind my truck. The woman who got out looked like Clara, but sharper around the edges. Same bone structure, same height. But where Clara moved like someone comfortable in her own skin, this woman moved like someone perpetually 5 minutes late for something important. Mom, the woman said, her voice carrying the particular brand of exasperation reserved for family members. What happened to the mailbox? I belled, Claire replied, and I caught the slight shift in her tone, less relaxed, more careful. Edwin's fixing it. Edwin, this is my daughter, Mabel Wilder. Mabel looked me up and down with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making quick judgments. Professional clothes, practical shoes, and an expression that suggested she'd found me wanting before I'd even opened my mouth. Fixing it how, exactly? She asked. New concrete footer. Reset the post. Make sure it's properly plumb, I said. Should be good for another 20 years, and this costs how much? Mabel, Clara said sharply. It's a reasonable question, Mom. You can't just hire people without getting estimates, without checking references, without treating me like I'm incompetent. Clara's voice had an edge now that I hadn't heard before. I'm 50, not 90. I think I can manage hiring someone to fix a mailbox. Mabel's expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. I'm just looking out for you. There are a lot of people who take advantage of what? Widows? Women living alone? People who stress bake? Clara crossed her arms. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about home repairs. I should have left. This was clearly a family conversation that didn't need an audience. But something about the way Mabel was looking at her mother like Clara was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be trusted made. And you want to stick around long enough to make sure Clara didn't get steamrolled. I should get going, I said, giving Clara an easy out if she wanted one. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon to check on the concrete and finish up. Perfect, Clara said, her smile returning. Mabel waited until I'd gotten into my truck before continuing their conversation, but I could see them in my rearview mirror as I backed out of the driveway. Clara's body language was defensive, Mabel's was insistent, and I had the uncomfortable feeling I'd just become a point of contention between them. That evening, I found myself thinking about Clara more than was probably healthy for someone I'd known for less than 6 hours. Not just the kiss question, though, that was definitely part of it, but the way she'd talked about her husband. It's the way she'd lit up when she laughed. It's the way she'd looked when Mabel started treating her like she couldn't be trusted to make basic decisions. My nephew Gary called around 8, ostensibly to borrow my tile saw, but really because his mother had trained him to check on me periodically. You sound weird, he said, after we'd sorted out the logistics of the tile saw pickup. I don't sound weird. I sound exactly the same as always. Nah, you sound, I don't know, less grumpy. When's the last time you sounded less grumpy? Gary was 26 and had the kind of confidence that came from never having been really wrong about anything important yet. He was also annoyingly perceptive. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Unhung. So there's no particular reason you're in a good mood on a Wednesday night? No interesting job today? Ain't no unexpected developments in the exciting world of home repair? Gary, no attractive client who made you remember you're not actually a hermit. Did you never mind? I don't want to know. Mom talked to Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson talked to her neighbor. The neighbor lives on Maple Ridge and saw your truck in someone's driveway for 3 hours today. Gary was clearly enjoying himself. Small towns, Uncle Edwin. Information travels faster than gossip, and gossip travels faster than light. I groaned. It was a mailbox repair, not a marriage proposal, yet Gary said cheerfully. Hey, what's she like? I paused, trying to figure out how to describe Clara in a way that wouldn't give Gary more ammunition. She's nice. Normal. Makes good cookies. Cookies? Gary's voice perked up. Hugh. Oh man, you're in trouble. Why am I in trouble? Because the last time a woman made you cookies, you married her. And we both know how that turned out. Yeah, but that was Sarah. Sarah made store-bought cookies and tried to pass them off as homemade. This is different. How is this different? You don't even know this woman. I know she made you cookies from scratch on the first day she met you. And I know you ate them instead of finding an excuse to leave. That's different. He had a point, but I wasn't about to admit it. Just be careful, Gary continued, his tone turning more serious. I mean, have fun, but, don't get attached to someone who's still figuring out how to be single. Who says she's figuring out how to be single? Edwin. Her husband died 7 months ago. She's definitely still figuring it out. After Gary hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about Clara's laugh, about the way she'd said, I'm 50. Will you kiss me? Like it was both a question and a dare. About the way her daughter had looked at her like she was a fragile thing that needed protection from her own poor judgment. Maybe Gary was right. Maybe I was setting myself up for complications I didn't need. But when I thought about Clara standing on her porch steps, admitting she'd forgotten she was allowed to fix things, herself, I knew I was going back tomorrow. And not just to check on the concrete. Some things were worth the risk of complications, even if I couldn't quite articulate what those things were yet. I showed up at Clara's the next afternoon with a bag of fresh concrete mix, and what I told myself was purely professional curiosity about whether the mailbox had survived the night. The concrete had cured perfectly, and the post was solid as a rock. I could have been in and out in 20 minutes. Instead, I found myself accepting Clara's offer of iced tea and sitting on her back porch, ostensibly to let the final adjustments settle, but really because she'd started telling me about the vegetable garden she was planning for the spring. Tom always handled the yard, she said, gesturing toward the perfectly manicured but somehow sterile landscape. He liked everything neat, controlled, symmetrical. No weeds, no wildflowers, definitely no vegetables, taking up space that could be used for more grass to mow. And now I'm thinking about tomatoes, maybe some herbs. Definitely sunflowers. Big, ridiculous kind that make the whole yard look happy. She took a sip of her tea. Is that crazy? Starting a garden at 50? Clara, my grandmother, started keeping bees at 73. Said she'd always wanted to try it, but my grandfather thought it was too dangerous. After he died, she figured the worst that could happen was she'd get stung, and she'd survived worse than that. Did she like it? The beekeeping? Loved it. Made the best honey I've ever tasted. Said the bees were better company than most people anyway. Clara smiled. I think I would have liked your grandmother. She would have liked you too. She had strong opinions about people who apologize for wanting things. I don't apologize for wanting things, no. Yesterday you apologized for asking me to kiss you. I apologize for asking inappropriately. There's a difference, is there? Looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing whether to answer that question honestly. Before she could decide, her phone rang. Hi, Mabel, she answered, and I watched her shoulders tense slightly. No, I'm fine. Yes, he's here finishing up the mailbox. No, you don't need to, she paused, listening to whatever Mabel was saying. On the other end, her expression shifted from mild irritation to something closer to resignation. Fine, she said finally. But you're bringing dinner if you're coming over. I'm not cooking for an intervention. After she hung up, Clara sat quietly for a moment, staring at her phone like it had personally betrayed her. Intervention? I asked. Mabel thinks I'm making impulsive decisions because I'm grieving. She's bringing reinforcements. What kind of reinforcements? My sister asked her. Probably. Maybe our neighbor Mrs. Gideon? Possibly Dr. Curtis from the grief counseling group Tom made me promise to attend. Clara sighed. They mean well. But they've decided that any change I want to make is really just me acting out because I'm not processing my emotions properly. And what do you think? I think maybe I'm finally processing them exactly right. An hour later, I understood what Clara meant about reinforcements. Mabel arrived with takeout containers and Astor Wilder, a woman in her mid-40s who looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Behind them came Mrs. Gideon, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to organizing church potlucks and community fundraisers. I was packing up my tools when they arrived, but Clara asked me to stay for dinner. Please, she said quietly. I have a feeling I'm going to need an ally. The dinner conversation started pleasantly enough. Astor complimented the mailbox repair. Mrs. Gideon asked about my business, and Mabel made polite small talk about the weather. But I could feel the undercurrent of something else. Like the pressure drop before a storm, it was Astor who finally brought up what they'd really come to discuss. Clara, we're worried about you, she said, setting down her fork. You've been making a lot of changes. Lately, the haircut, redecorating the living room, and now hiring strangers for things Tom used to handle. Edwin's not a stranger anymore, Clara said mildly. We've had 2 whole conversations. That's exactly what we mean, Mabel jumped in. Mom, you barely know this man, and you're already treating him like what? Like a friend. Like someone you can trust. And maybe that's not the best judgment call right now. I started to stand up, figuring this was definitely my cue to leave, but Clara put her hand on my arm. Edwin's not the problem here, she said, her voice steady but with an edge. The problem is that all of you seem to think I've lost the ability to make rational decisions about my own life. Mrs. Gideon leaned forward. Honey, nobody thinks that. You just want to make sure you're not rushing into things because you're lonely. What if I am lonely? Clara asked. What if I am rushing into things? What if I want to make changes and meet new people and maybe even, God forbid, enjoy myself occasionally? Nothing, Astor said carefully. But it's only been 7 months since my husband died. I know. I was there. Clara's voice was getting sharper. But Tom's dead, and I'm not. And I'm tired of everyone acting like I should be grateful for the opportunity to grieve quietly in the corner until some acceptable amount of time has passed, and I can be trusted to rejoin the human race. The table went quiet. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. We're not saying that, Mabel said finally, but her voice was smaller than before. Aren't you? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like you're all sitting around, waiting for me to go back to being the person I was when Tom was alive. But here's the thing, I can't go back to being that person, because that person existed in a world where Tom was alive. This is a different world, and I need to be a different person in it. I found myself thinking about my grandmother and her, bees about Clara's planned sunflower garden, about the way she'd looked when she asked if starting over at 50 was crazy. For what it's worth, I said, speaking up for the first time since dinner started, I think Clara's judgment is fine. It's better than fine, actually. She researched contractors, got references, asked the right questions about the work. Making impulsive decisions, she's making informed ones. Mabel looked at me like I'd just declared my intention to run away and join the circus. You've known her for 2 days. Sometimes 2 days is enough to recognize competence when you see it. Clara smiled at me, small but genuine, and suddenly I understood that this wasn't really about mailboxes or home repairs or even about me. This was about whether Clara was going to be allowed to figure out who she was now, or whether the people who loved her were going to insist she stay frozen in who she used to be. I appreciate that you're all worried about me, Clara said, her voice softer now, but no less determined. But I need you to trust me to know what I need. And right now, what I need is to make my own mistakes and my own decisions, and maybe even my own friends. She looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Can you do that for me?" The dinner intervention ended with awkward hugs and promises to give Clara some space. But I could tell from the way Mabel kept glancing between her mother and me that the conversation was far from over. After everyone left, Clara and I found ourselves alone in her kitchen, surrounded by takeout containers and the lingering tension of family dynamics. "Well," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher, "that was about as fun as a root canal performed by someone who learned dentistry from YouTube videos." "They love you," I said, because it seemed like something that needed to be acknowledged, even if their love felt suffocating. "I know they do. That's what makes it so complicated." She closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. "When Tom got sick, everyone rallied around us. Meal trains, grocery runs, people checking in constantly. It was wonderful and necessary, and I'll never stop being grateful for it. But now they can't seem to stop. Like they've forgotten that the crisis is over and I'm actually okay. Better than okay, maybe?" She paused. "Does that make me sound ungrateful?" "It makes you sound like someone who's ready to live her life instead of just surviving it." Over the next week, I found myself at Clara's house more often than any mailbox repair could reasonably justify. First, it was a leaky kitchen faucet that turned into coffee on the back porch. Then a squeaky hinge that led to helping her move furniture so she could paint the living room. Each visit revealed another layer of the life she was building for herself, and another glimpse of the woman she was becoming. The house itself told stories. Wedding photos had been moved from prominent display to a single shelf in the hallway, not hidden, but no longer dominating every room. The formal dining room had been converted into what Clara called her project space, with a sewing machine, art supplies, and stacks of library books about everything from pottery to French cooking. "I'm trying things," she explained, when she caught me looking at a half-finished watercolor of sunflowers. "Tom always said I had too many hobbies, that I never stuck with anything long enough to get good at it. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I wasn't supposed to get good at things. Maybe I was supposed to enjoy trying them. Work, golf, maintaining the perfect lawn." She said it without bitterness, just matter of fact. "He was a good man, Edwin. Don't misunderstand me. He was steady and reliable, and he loved me completely. But he thought life was about finding your lane and staying in it. I'm starting to think maybe life is about changing lanes whenever you want to see what's down a different road." It was during one of these conversations, while I was fixing a loose cabinet door and Clara was making what she called experimental soup, that she told me about Andrew. "Tom's brother," she said, stirring something that smelled like herbs and possibility. "He's been calling a lot." "Calling about what?" "Well, officially, he's checking on me, making sure I'm doing okay. That I don't need anything, that I'm taking care of myself." She used air quotes around the last part. "Unofficially, I think he's been appointed by the family to keep an eye on me. And how do you feel about that? Like I'm being managed again." She tasted the soup, made a face, and added more salt. "Andrew means well, but he's got Tom's same approach to problem solving. Identify the issue, implement the solution, maintain the status quo. Except I'm not a problem to be solved anymore." I was adjusting the cabinet door when she said, "He asked me out." My hand slipped, and the screwdriver gouged a small mark in the wood. "What?" "Andrew? He asked me to dinner. Said it had been long enough that Tom would want me to have companionship, that it would be natural for us to explore our connection." "Your connection? We've known each other for 22 years. We have the same taste in restaurants. We both miss Tom." Clara's voice was carefully neutral. "According to Andrew, that's a solid foundation for a relationship. And what do you think?" "I think Andrew is a perfectly nice man who would be perfectly happy to have me slip seamlessly into the same life I had with his brother, just with him instead." She turned off the stove and looked at me. "I think he sees me as Tom's widow who needs taken care of, not as Clara who's figuring out what she wants." "And what do you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. "I want someone to see me as a beginning, not an ending. I want someone who's curious about who I'm becoming, not nostalgic for who I used to be." The cabinet door was fixed, but I found myself lingering in her kitchen, reluctant to break whatever spell had settled over our conversation. Clara served me a bowl of the experimental soup, which turned out to be delicious despite her doubts. And we ate standing at the counter like teenagers sneaking midnight snacks. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Sure. When you were married, did you ever feel like you were living someone else's idea of your life?" I thought about Sarah, about the house she'd wanted in the subdivision with the homeowners. Association about the dinner parties with people whose names I could never remember. About the way she'd talked about our future like it was a business plan that just needed proper execution. "Yeah," I said. "I did. What did you do about it?" "Nothing, for a long time. Then she left me for someone whose idea of life matched hers better." I smiled ruefully. Turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, but it took me a while to figure that out. "Are you happy now, living your own idea of your life?" "Most days. But it's lonely sometimes, making all the decisions yourself." "That's what Andrew said, that I don't have to be lonely anymore, but you do have to be yourself." Clara nodded slowly. That's what I told him when I said no. Something warm settled in my chest at her words. But before I could examine the feeling too closely, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and sighed. "Speaking of Andrew," she said, declining the call. "That's the third time today. It's persistent. He's determined to save me from my poor judgment." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The irony is that my judgment has never been clearer. When I left that night, Clara walked me to the door, something that had become our routine over the past week. This time, instead of saying goodbye on the porch, she followed me down the front steps to where my truck was parked. "Edwin," she said as I was opening the driver's door. "Yeah, thank you. For not trying to save me from anything." "Clara, you don't need saving, I know. But not everyone sees it that way." I was about to respond when headlights swept across the driveway. A black SUV pulled in behind my truck, and Andrew Morgan climbed out. He was tall, well-dressed, and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to be wherever he was. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying easily across the evening air. "We need to talk." Andrew Morgan looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play concerned family member. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, wearing the kind of casual Friday outfit that probably costs more than most people's monthly car payments. He had Tom's jawline, in the same way of standing with his hands clasped behind his back. But where Tom had been warm according to Clara's stories, Andrew radiated the controlled authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions treated as facts, Andrew, Clara said, and I could hear her mentally shifting gears. "I wasn't expecting you. I was in the neighborhood." His eyes flicked to me, then back to Clara. "Are you going to introduce me to your friend, Edwin Reeves?" I said, extending my hand before Clara could answer. "I've been helping Clara with some repairs around the house." Andrew's handshake was firm, assessing. The kind that lasted just long enough to establish that he was taking my measure and finding it adequate but unremarkable. "Andrew Morgan," he replied. "Clara's brother-in-law. I've been helping her with some of the larger decisions." Since Tom passed, the emphasis on larger decisions wasn't lost on any of us. "Well," I said, sensing the undercurrent of territorial marking that was happening, "I should let you two catch up." "Clara, I'll call you about that kitchen outlet we discussed." "Actually," Clara said, her voice carrying a note I hadn't heard. Before something between determination and defiance, "Why don't you stay for a few minutes?" "Andrew, Edwin's become a good friend over the past couple of weeks. I'm sure he'd enjoy hearing about your visit." Andrew's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, though, what I wanted to discuss is somewhat personal, and it's perfect." "That Edwin's here," Clara replied smoothly. "I don't really do secrets anymore." We ended up in Clara's living room, arranged in a triangle of carefully maintained politeness that felt like a chess game, where everyone was pretending they weren't competing. Andrew chose the chair that had clearly been Tom's leather, positioned to command the best view of both the television and the front window. Clara sat on the couch, and I took the other chair, trying to look like someone who belonged there without overplaying my hand. "So," Andrew said, settling back like he owned the place, "I've been hearing interesting things about your social life." "Lately? From whom?" Mabel's concerned. "Esther mentioned you've been making some impulsive choices." His gaze drifted meaningfully toward me. "I thought maybe we should talk about it." "What exactly did you want to talk about?" Clara, you know I care about you. We all do. But it's been less than 8 months since Tom died. And you're already," he paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "You're already forming attachments that might not be in your best interest." I started to stand up. "Maybe I should stay," Clara said firmly. Then, to Andrew, "Attachments? You know what I mean? You're vulnerable right now, whether you want to admit it or not. And there are people who might take advantage of that vulnerability." The room went very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the distant sound of someone's television through the walls. "Are you suggesting that Edwin is taking advantage of me?" Clara's voice was dangerously calm. "I'm suggesting that a woman in your position might not be thinking clearly about the motivations of men who suddenly appear in her life." "My position, Clara?" "You're a wealthy widow living alone in a big house. You're lonely, you're grieving, and you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. That makes you a target." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. "Andrew," I said, keeping my voice level, "I think you might be overstepping. I don't think I am. In fact, I think someone needs to ask the obvious questions here." He turned to face me directly. "How exactly did you find Clara? Did you seek her out specifically, or was this really just a coincidence?" "He didn't find me," Clara interjected before I could answer. "I called him," Mrs. Patterson recommended. "Him. Mrs. Patterson, who's lived next door for 15 years and has never needed a handyman before." "Mrs. Patterson, who somehow suddenly had Edwin's number when you needed work done?" Clara went very still. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. This man appears in your life at a vulnerable moment. He's here constantly for jobs that any homeowner could handle themselves. And now you're emotionally invested in someone you've known for 2 weeks. 3 weeks, Clara corrected, but her voice sounded smaller than it had a moment before. 3 weeks, Andrew repeated. Clara Tom was sick for 18 months. 18 months of doctors and treatments and hope and despair. You were his caregiver, his advocate, his everything. And now, 12 weeks after the funeral, you're ready to trust a complete stranger with access to your home, your finances, your emotional well-being. I haven't given him access to my finances. Yet, but you've given him keys to your house, haven't you? You've told him about your assets, your insurance settlement, your plans for the future. I watched Clara's face change as Andrew spoke. Watched. Doubt creep in around the edges of the confidence she'd been building. Was good at this, not lying exactly, but presenting facts in a way that created a narrative she'd never considered. Edwin, she said quietly, not looking at me. Maybe you should go, Clara. Please. I need to think about what Andrew's saying. I stood up slowly, feeling like I was in a play where someone had changed the script without telling me. What you want. It's what she needs, Andrew said, also standing. Clara, I know this is hard to hear, but someone had to say it. Tom would have said it. After I left, I sat in my truck in Clara's driveway for a long time, engine off, trying to process what had just happened. Through the living room window, I could see Clara and Andrew talking, him leaning forward earnestly, her sitting very straight with her arms crossed. My phone buzzed with a text from Gary. How's the mailbox, lady? I stared at the message for a minute, then typed back, complicated. Good complicated or bad complicated? I don't know yet. But as I drove home, Andrew's words echoing in my head, I had a sinking feeling that I was about to find out. 3 days passed without a word from Clara. No calls about squeaky hinges or loose handles. No texts asking when I might be in the neighborhood. Just silence that felt heavier with each passing hour. On Friday morning, Mrs. Patterson flagged me down as I was leaving for a job across town. Edwin, dear, she called from her front porch, still in her robe and slippers despite it being nearly 9 o'clock. Do you have a minute? Mrs. Patterson was 83 and had never asked for a minute of my time that didn't result in at least an hour of stories about her late husband's war service or her opinions on the declining quality of grocery store tomatoes. Morning, Mrs. Patterson, what can I do for you? It's about Clara. She gestured toward the Morgan house, where the curtains had been drawn tight for 3 days straight. Have you talked to her lately? Not since Tuesday? Why? because that brother-in-law of hers has been there every day, brings groceries, stays for hours, leaves looking like the cat that ate the canary. She adjusted her robe and fixed me with a look that had probably terrified neighborhood children for decades. And Clara hasn't been outside once, not even two. Get her mail. Something cold settled in my chest. Maybe she's sick. Maybe she's hiding. Mrs. Patterson stepped closer to her porch rail. Edwin, I don't know what Andrew said to her the other night, but ever since then, that girl's been acting like she's done something wrong. And the only thing Clara's done wrong lately is start acting happy again.
I spent the morning installing
new cabinet hardware for a client in Riverside, but my mind kept drifting to Clara's house, to those drawn curtains, to the way she'd asked me to leave without meeting my eyes. Around noon, I made a decision that was either brave or stupid. I still haven't figured out which. I drove to Clara's house and knocked on her front door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Clara, it's Edwin. I just want to make sure you're okay. Still nothing, but I could see a shadow move behind the living room curtains. I'm not leaving until I know you're all right, I called through the door. So you can either talk to me now, or I'm going to start singing off-key until the neighbors complain. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Clara stood there in sweatpants and one of Tom's old college t-shirts, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that suggested she hadn't bothered with a mirror in days. I'm fine, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. No, you're not. Edwin, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Make what harder? She stepped back from the door, leaving it open but not exactly inviting me in. I followed her into the living room, where I could see evidence of Andrew's extended visits, coffee cups for two, legal documents spread across the coffee table, and a laptop open to what looked like real estate listings. Clara, what's going on? She sat down on the couch, finally looking at me directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed and tired. Andrew's right. About everything, what do you mean? I've been acting like a teenager with a first crush instead of a 50-year-old woman. Who should know better? Her voice was flat, defeated. Been making decisions based on feelings instead of logic. I've been dragging you into a situation that's not fair to either of us. What situation? This one, where I pretend I'm ready for something new when I'm clearly not, where I act like I know who I am when I obviously don't, where I make you responsible for helping me figure out my life when that's not your job. I sat down across from her, careful to keep some distance between us. Who says that's what's happening? Andrew. Mabel, Astor, Dr. Curtis. She ticked them off on her fingers. Everyone who actually cares about me, instead of just wanting to sleep with me. Is that what you think I want? I don't know what you want. That's the problem. She pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller. I don't know anything anymore. I thought I was getting stronger, more independent, more myself. But maybe I was just getting more lost. Clara, I've been thinking about what Andrew said about timing, about vulnerability, about the fact that you showed up right when I was most confused about everything. She looked at me with something that might have been accusation or might have been plea. How do I know what's real and what's just me being desperate for someone to make me feel normal again? Because real doesn't feel desperate. Real feels like coming home. But how do I know the difference? How do I trust my own judgment when everyone I love is telling me it's compromised? The question hung between us like a challenge I wasn't sure how to meet. Because the truth was, I didn't know how she could know. I didn't know how anyone knew the difference between love and loneliness, between genuine connection and the human need to feel less alone in the world. Maybe, I said finally, you can't know for sure. Maybe that's what makes it worth doing. Clara was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. Andrew thinks I should sell the house, she said eventually. Move into something smaller, closer to Mabel. Start fresh somewhere without so many memories. What do you think? I think I'm scared that everyone's right. That I'm not ready for any of this. Yeah, that I'm going to hurt you, or myself, or both of us. She looked up at me, and I could see the fear she'd been hiding behind all that newfound confidence. And I think I'm even more scared that they're wrong. I should have walked away. Any reasonable person would have recognized the signs of a grieving woman being pressured by her family. A situation with more landmines than a war zone, complications that extended far beyond fixing mailboxes. But sitting in Clara's living room, watching her try to disappear into Tom's old t-shirt, I realized something that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. I was falling in love with her. Not with the idea of rescuing her, not with the fantasy of being needed, but with Clara herself, the woman who stress-baked and planned sunflower gardens and asked inappropriate questions because she'd forgotten how to pretend she didn't want things. What if they're all wrong? I said. What? Andrew, Mabel, everyone who thinks you're not ready? What if they're wrong? Clara pulled the sleeves of Tom's shirt down over her hands. Then I'm still scared. Of what? Of wanting something and losing it again. Of being happy and having it taken away. Of caring about someone and watching them leave. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Of being 50 years old and still having no idea who I'm supposed to be. Clara, what if you don't have to be supposed to be anyone? What if you just get to be who you are right now, today, and see what happens tomorrow? That sounds terrifying. Yeah, it does. But staying frozen sounds worse. She was quiet for a long moment, then reached for a tissue from the box on the coffee table. Andrew's been showing me condos. Nice ones, with maintenance included, and security systems, and neighbors who play bridge instead of hosting dinner parties for virtual strangers. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. That's the problem everyone keeps pointing out. She looked around the living room, taking in the piano she'd been playing again, the art supplies scattered on the side table, the cookbook open to a recipe for something ambitious in French. But I know what I don't want. I don't want to live in a place where I'm not allowed to make noise or mess or mistakes. And don't. Edwin, it's not that simple. Why not? Because... She stopped, seeming to search for words that would explain. The complexity of family expectations and social pressures and the weight of other people's concern, because everyone's watching. Everyone has opinions. Everyone thinks they know what's best for me. So stop asking them. She stared at me. What? Stop asking for permission. Stop asking for approval. Stop letting other people vote on your life. I leaned forward. Clara, you're not a committee decision. You're a person. You get to choose. And what if I choose wrong? Then you choose again. That's what people do. They make choices, some work out, some don't, and they keep choosing. Something shifted. In her expression, not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of hope. Mrs. Patterson's been asking about you, I said, changing tactics. She thinks Andrew's got you under house arrest. Mrs. Patterson needs to mind her own business. She also said you haven't gotten your mail in 3 days. I haven't felt like dealing with condolence cards and credit card offers. What if there's something else in there? Something good? Clara looked skeptical but stood up anyway. Fine. But if it's another sympathy casserole recipe from someone I haven't talked to since high school, I'm blaming you. We walked to the mailbox together, the perfectly straight, properly installed mailbox that had started this whole mess. Clara opened it and pulled out the usual stack of catalogs and bills, but at the bottom was a hand-addressed envelope with no return address. That's weird, she said, turning it over. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a message written in careful script. Clara, I heard you play piano at the Riverside Community Center benefit 5 years ago. My name is Curtis Gideon, and I run a small supper club downtown. Would you consider playing for us on Friday nights? Nothing fancy, just music and good food and people who appreciate both. Call me if you're interested. Clara read the note twice, then looked at me. How did he know where I live? Small town? Word travels? What word? I haven't played anywhere public since that benefit. Maybe that's the point. Maybe people remember. She folded the note carefully, then unfolded it and read it again. I got supper. Club. Sounds like it. With actual people listening. That's usually how music works. For the first time in days, Clara smiled. Not the careful, polite smile she'd been wearing since Andrew's visit, but something real and surprised and a little bit excited. I could call him, she said, just to ask what kind of music he's looking for. You could. It might be terrible. I might be terrible. You might be amazing, Edwin. Yeah. If I do this, if I call him, if I try playing again, will you come? To the first one, I mean. just so there's at least one friendly face in the audience. Claire, I'll be there for all of them if you want. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her making a choice. It's not about the supper club, not about the music, but about something bigger. Okay, she said. Let's see what happens. When we got back to the house, Andrew's car was pulling into the driveway. Andrew got out of his car carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing the expression of someone who'd come to deliver good news to a grateful recipient. When he saw me standing with Clara by the mailbox, his smile faltered. Clara, he said, walking toward us with the measured pace of someone trying to maintain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. I thought we agreed you were going to take some time to think things through. We didn't agree on anything, Clara replied, folding Curtis Gideon's note and slipping it into her pocket. You talked. I listened. I brought you those lilies you like. From the farmer's market, he held out the bouquet like a peace offering. I thought we could look at a few more properties this afternoon. There's a beautiful place in Riverside with a garden courtyard that would be perfect for your hobbies. My hobbies? The painting? The cooking experiments? Oh, those creative projects you've been exploring? Andrew's tone was carefully patient, the way you'd talk to a child who needed to be guided toward the right decision. You could have a dedicated space for them without the burden of maintaining an entire house. Clara took the flowers, but didn't. Smile. What if I don't want a dedicated space? What if I want my hobbies scattered all over my house because it's my house and I can do whatever I want with it? Clara, be reasonable. This house is too big for one person. Too much work, too. Many expenses. Too many memories. Maybe I like the memories. Some memories are worth keeping. Others just hold us back from moving forward. Andrew glanced at me meaningfully. From making healthy choices about the future, I could feel the conversation teetering on the edge of something that would determine not just Clara's afternoon plans, but the entire trajectory of what happened next. And I realized at this moment, standing in her front yard with a note about music in her pocket, and her brother-in-law trying to manage her life, this was Clara's real test. Not whether she could play piano again, not whether she could trust her feelings about me, but whether she could trust herself enough to stop asking for permission to want things. Andrew, Clara said, her voice steady, I appreciate your concern. I appreciate the flowers and the house hunting and all the time you've spent trying to help me figure out my life. But I need you to stop. Stop what? Stop helping. Stop managing. Stop acting like Tom died and left you in charge of me.
I see.
She handed the flowers back to him. I'm not a problem that needs solving. I'm not a project that needs managing. I'm a person who gets to make her own decisions, even if they're wrong. Andrew's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, and finally something that looked like disappointment. Clara, you're not thinking clearly. It's understandable given everything you've been through, but no, Clara's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare. Don't you dare stand in my driveway and tell me I'm not thinking clearly because I disagree with you. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From living. From taking risks. From possibly making mistakes. Clara stepped closer to Andrew, and I could see 22 years of being managed finally reaching its breaking point. Tom protected me too. From financial decisions, from social complications, from anything that might be messy or uncertain or require me to figure things out for myself. And you know what? I let him, because it was easier and because I thought that's what marriage was supposed to look like. Tom loved you. Yes, he did. And I loved him. Love doesn't mean taking away someone's right to make their own choices. Clara's voice softened slightly. Andrew, I know you mean well, but I need to learn how to be responsible for my own life now. I need to make my own mistakes and my own successes and my own decisions about what makes me happy. And you think? He makes you happy? Andrew nodded toward me. Clara looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing how much truth she was willing to claim in front of an audience. I think he makes me feel like myself, she said finally. Like the person I might have been all along, if I hadn't been so afraid of disappointing everyone. Andrew stood there, holding the rejected flowers, looking like a man whose carefully constructed plan had just collapsed around him. I think you're making a mistake, maybe. I am, but it's my mistake to make. Tom wouldn't want this for you. Tom's dead, Andrew. I'm not. and I get to decide what I want my life to look like now. After Andrew left flowers, real estate listings, and wounded dignity all loaded back into his SUV, Clara and I stood in her driveway, watching his taillights disappear around the corner. "That felt good," she said quietly. "How good? Good enough to call Curtis Gideon about the supper club." She pulled the note from her pocket and looked at it again. I could see her making another choice, smaller than the one she'd just made. With Andrew, but maybe more important, Edwin. "Yeah. Will you help me pick out something to wear? I have no idea what one wears to audition for a supper club on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara, you could show up in Tom's old t-shirt and they'd still be lucky to have you." She smiled. "I think I can do better than that." The Riverside Supper Club turned out to be a converted Victorian house with mismatched furniture, candles on every table, and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to order wine, even if you'd planned on coffee. Curtis Gideon was a man in his 60s with paint-stained fingers and the easy smile of someone who'd spent years creating spaces where people felt comfortable being themselves. "Clara Morgan," he said, when we walked in, rising from a corner table where he'd been reading what looked like sheet music. "I was hoping you'd call." "This is Edwin," Clara said, her hand finding mine with the natural ease that had developed between us over the past month. "I hope it's okay that I brought moral support." "It's more than okay. We always need more good listeners." Curtis gestured toward the piano in the corner, an old upright that had clearly been well-loved and well-maintained. "Shall we see what magic we can make?" What happened next was something I'd remember for the rest of my life. Clara sat down at the piano, adjusted the bench, and played. Not tentatively, not apologetically, but with the confidence of someone who'd finally stopped asking permission to take up space in the world. She started with something soft and jazzy, her fingers finding their way across the keys like they were greeting old friends. Then she sang not loudly, but with a richness that filled the room and made the handful of early dinner customers stop their conversations to listen. By the time she finished the first song, Curtis was grinning. By the time she finished the third, there was a small crowd gathered around the piano. And by the time she played her final piece, something she said she'd written years ago but never shared with anyone, I understood why people had remembered her performance from 5 years earlier. "Friday nights," Curtis said when the impromptu concert ended. 7 to 10. "We can talk money later, but I promise it'll be fair." Just like that. "Clara, I've been running this place for 12 years. I know magic when I hear it." On the drive home, Clara was quieter than I'd expected. It's not sad exactly, but thoughtful in a way that made me give her space to process whatever was happening in her head. "My hands are shaking," she said eventually, holding them up to show me the slight tremor. "I can't tell if it's nerves or adrenaline, or just the fact that I haven't performed for anyone in years." "How did it feel?" "Terrifying, amazing, like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time." She turned to look at me. "Is that normal? I don't know, but it sounds like living." When we got back to her house, there were 2 cars in the driveway, Abel's sedan and a Honda I didn't recognize. Through the front window, I could see several people gathered in the living room. "Intervention number 2? I asked. "Probably, though I'm starting to think I'm okay with that." The people in Clara's living room turned out to be Mabel, Astor, Mrs. Gideon from down the street, and a woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as Janet Welder, a friend from Clara's teaching days. They'd clearly been deep in conversation when we arrived, and the expressions on their faces suggested it hadn't been about the weather. "Mom," Mabel said, standing up as we walked in, "we need to talk about Andrew." "What about Andrew?" He called us. All of us. "Said you'd had some kind of breakdown this afternoon, that you were making irrational decisions, that we needed to stage an intervention before you did something you'd regret." Clara looked around the room at these women who'd known her for years, who'd watched her navigate marriage and motherhood and widowhood, who'd apparently gathered to save her from herself again. "And what do you think?" she asked. It was Janet who answered first. "I think Andrew's an ass who's been trying to control you since before Tom died. I think it's about time someone said so." Janet Astor protested, but she was smiling. "What?" "It's true. Remember how we used to help with Tom's medical decisions? How I'd show up at doctor appointments and speak for both of you like you weren't sitting right there. Mrs. Gideon nodded vigorously. And don't get me started on how he tried to plan Tom's funeral without asking what you wanted. The point is, Mabel said, shooting warning looks at the other women. We came here expecting to talk you out of whatever Andrew said you were planning, but after sitting here for an hour talking about it, we realized something. What's that? You've been happier in the past month than you've been in years, even before Tom got sick. Mabel's voice was softer now, less certain, and maybe that's not something we should be trying to fix. Clara sat down on the couch, and I could see her processing this unexpected turn of events. So you're not here to convince me to move to a condo and stop seeing Edwin?
We're here, Esther said.
To ask. If you need help moving your piano to the supper club for Friday nights, the smile that spread across Clara's face was pure joy. And watching her accept the support of these women, support for who she was becoming, rather than pressure to return to who she'd been, felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tense. Actually, Clara said, reaching for my hand, I think I might need help with a lot of things. Starting with figuring out what to wear when you're 50 and falling in love and playing piano for strangers and generally having no idea what you're doing, but doing it anyway. Now that, Janet said, sounds like the Clara I remember. As the evening progressed, with wine and laughter and stories about dreams deferred and second chances, I watched Clara claim her space in her own life. Not quietly, not apologetically, but with the confidence of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being loved and being managed. And I realized that fixing her mailbox had been the easy part. What we'd built together, trust, possibility, the courage to want things, that was the real repair work, the kind that lasted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.